"Take off the badge, Officer Mercer." The words landed with more weight than a shouted command ever could. Daniel Mercer sat rigid beneath the cold fluorescent lights of the disciplinary room, his uniform still crisp, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the small black case resting on the table before him. Outside the narrow window, Washington, D.C., was beginning to wake. The sky had softened from midnight blue to a pale gray, and the first line of sunrise stretched over the rooftops less than a mile away. On the wall, the clock read 5:58 a.m. Mercer looked from the case to Police Chief Robert Ellis, searching for hesitation, sympathy, anything that might tell him this was temporary. He found none. Chief Ellis stood with both hands resting on the back of an empty chair, his face worn by a night that had changed the department before most of the city had poured its first cup of coffee. "You heard me," Ellis said quietly. "Your badge. Now." Mercer swallowed. Just 8 hours earlier, he had walked into one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city believing his uniform gave him the final word. He had spoken with confidence. He had ignored explanations. He had decided who belonged and who did not before checking a single fact. Now every decision from that night had followed him into this room. The security footage, the witness recording, the restaurant reservation, the report he had signed, and one name he had not recognized until it was far too late. Justice Evelyn Brooks. Mercer reached toward the silver shield pinned over his heart, but his fingers stopped inches away. That badge had opened doors for him. It had silenced arguments. It had made strangers step aside when he entered a room. For years, he had mistaken obedience for respect and authority for truth. Now the medal seemed heavier than it ever had before. "Chief, you don't understand what happened," he said. Ellis's expression did not change. "That is exactly what you wrote in your report." Mercer's eyes shifted toward the folder beside the black case. It contained 12 pages, 3 witness statements, and a timeline beginning at 9:47 p.m. At the Belmont restaurant. Somewhere inside that folder was the moment his career had started to disappear, though at the time it had felt ordinary to him. A woman sitting alone at table 12. A manager whispering a complaint. A wealthy customer demanding special treatment. Mercer had seen a problem and believed he already knew what it looked like. He had not known the woman was a Supreme Court justice. But that was not the reason he was losing his badge. He was losing it because he believed she needed a title before she deserved dignity. The clock clicked forward. 5:59 a.m. Mercer finally unfastened the badge. The soft metallic sound filled the room. Chief Ellis opened the case. Mercer placed the shield inside, and for the first time that night, he understood that sunrise was not bringing him a new day. It was revealing everything darkness had allowed him to hide. 8 hours earlier, Justice Evelyn Brooks had walked into the Belmont carrying only a reservation, a wedding ring, and the quiet expectation that she would be treated like any other American. At 9:47 p.m., the Belmont glowed like a private world sealed behind polished glass and soft golden light. The rain had thinned to a silver mist over Pennsylvania Avenue, and black sedans moved slowly past the entrance while umbrellas opened and closed beneath the striped awning. Inside, crystal glasses caught the light above white tablecloths, a pianist played near the far wall, and conversation stayed low enough to make wealth sound like good manners. Justice Evelyn Brooks entered without an escort. She wore a charcoal coat over a simple navy dress, carried a small leather handbag, and moved with the quiet steadiness of someone who had spent a lifetime walking into rooms where people studied her before deciding how much respect to offer. The hostess looked up with a practiced smile. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" Evelyn gave her name. The hostess checked the screen, and something in her expression changed. "Yes, Ms. Brooks. Table 12. Evelyn noticed the hesitation, but said nothing. She had chosen that table for a reason. 29 years earlier, before the titles, the confirmation hearings, and the marble halls, her husband, Thomas, had brought her there after she won her first major civil rights case. They had sat at table 12 with $40 between them, ordered one dessert to share, and promised each other they would return every year no matter where life carried them. Thomas had been gone for 3 years now, but the promise remained. Evelyn reached the table and rested her hand briefly on the empty chair across from her. In her handbag was his wedding ring, wrapped in a folded white handkerchief. She brought it every year, not because she could not let go, but because some forms of love did not need to end in order for life to continue. A young server named Jamal Reed approached with water and a warm, careful smile. "Good evening, ma'am. My name is Jamal. I will be taking care of you tonight." "Thank you, Jamal," Evelyn said. "I appreciate it." He placed the menu before her, then paused when he noticed the second chair. "Will someone be joining you?" Evelyn looked at the chair and smiled faintly. "Not tonight." Jamal nodded with the instinctive respect of someone who understood that certain silences should not be questioned. Across the room, restaurant manager Claire Whitmore was watching. Her eyes moved from Evelyn's modest handbag to the empty chair, then to the reservation screen at the host station. Claire had spent years learning the preferences of senators, lobbyists, and executives, and she believed she could identify importance by the cut of a suit, the price of a watch, or the number of people waiting nearby. Evelyn fit none of those signals. At 9:53 p.m., Richard Vail arrived with 3 guests and demanded table 12. He had not reserved it, but he had spent enough money at the Belmont to mistake habit for ownership. Claire apologized and explained that the table was occupied. Richard looked toward Evelyn. His face tightened. "By her?" he asked. Claire did not correct his tone. She simply followed his gaze, and in that quiet moment, before a single accusation had been spoken, a decision began forming in the room. Evelyn had come to remember a promise. Someone else had already decided she did not belong there. Richard Vail did not lower his voice. He wanted the room to hear him. "I have brought clients here for 12 years, he said, glancing at Claire Whitmore as though the matter had already been decided. "That is my table." Claire gave him the careful smile she used whenever money arrived wrapped in arrogance. "I understand, Mr. Vail. Let me see what I can do." She crossed the dining room with her shoulders straight and her hands folded in front of her. Jamal noticed her coming and stepped aside, but his expression tightened. Evelyn had ordered tea and the roasted salmon. She was looking at the pianist, listening to a melody Thomas once loved, when Claire stopped beside the table. "Ms. Brooks," Claire began, "there appears to have been a problem with your reservation." Evelyn turned toward her. "What kind of problem?" "This table was promised to another guest. The hostess confirmed it when I arrived." Claire glanced toward Richard, who stood near the bar with his guests. "There may have been an error in the system." Evelyn looked at the empty tables along the opposite wall. "Then I assume the other guest can be seated at one of those." Claire's smile thinned. "Mr. Vail has a long history with this restaurant." "So do I," Evelyn said, although she did not explain. Claire had expected embarrassment, perhaps an apology, perhaps the quick retreat of someone made to feel unwelcome. Evelyn offered none of those things. Her calm made Claire uneasy because calm could not be managed as easily as fear. Richard approached before Claire could answer. "Is there a reason this is taking so long?" he asked. Evelyn looked at him. "You are waiting for a table. I am already seated at it." Richard gave a dry laugh. "This section is usually reserved for members and special guests." "My reservation was accepted," Evelyn replied. "That should be enough." Around them, nearby conversations softened. A few diners glanced over their menus. Others looked away with the deliberate concentration of people who preferred comfort to truth. Richard leaned toward Claire and spoke loudly enough for Evelyn to hear. "I do not know what story she gave the hostess, but I am not entertaining clients next to someone who clearly does not understand how this place works." Jamal's hand tightened around the water pitcher. Evelyn's face remained still, but something behind her eyes changed. She had heard the sentence in many forms throughout her life. In school hallways, in law offices, in rooms where her credentials had been examined more closely than anyone else's. The words were always dressed differently, but the message never changed. "You are here by mistake." Claire lowered her voice. "Mr. Vail says your behavior is making his party uncomfortable." Evelyn looked from Claire to Richard. "My behavior?" "Your tone has become confrontational." Evelyn had not raised her voice. She had not left her chair. She had asked only that a confirmed reservation be honored. Still, Claire had transformed composure into defiance and presence into disruption. At 10:03 p.m., she stepped toward the host station and reached for the telephone. Jamal watched her press a number he recognized. An officer named Daniel Mercer often stopped at the Belmont during late shifts, sometimes for coffee, sometimes to speak with Richard Vail. Claire told the person on the line that a customer was refusing to cooperate. She described Evelyn as agitated. She said the situation might escalate. None of it was true, But lies often move faster when they confirm what someone already wants to believe. Less than a minute later, Claire returned to the table. "Someone is coming to help resolve this," she said. Evelyn lifted her teacup, her hand perfectly steady. "No," she answered. "Someone is coming because you chose not to resolve it yourself." Outside, a patrol car turned onto the avenue, its headlights sliding across the rain-dark pavement. Inside, Richard smiled as though the table already belonged to him. Officer Daniel Mercer entered the Belmont at 10:11 p.m., with rain shining across the shoulders of his dark uniform and the practiced expression of a man who expected every room to rearrange itself around his authority. Claire Whitmore met him near the entrance before he had taken 3 steps. She spoke quickly, pointing toward table 12 and describing Evelyn as uncooperative, disruptive, and increasingly hostile. Mercer did not ask whether anyone had verified the reservation. He did not request the security footage. He did not speak to Jamal, the hostess, or any of the diners seated nearby. His eyes moved directly to Evelyn, and in that instant, he made a decision about her before hearing a single word from her mouth. Richard Vail approached and greeted Mercer by his first name. Their handshake was brief but familiar. "Glad you came," Richard said. "She has been causing trouble for almost 20 minutes. Evelyn checked the time on the small clock above the bar. She had been seated for 24 minutes. For most of that time, she had done nothing more than order dinner and refuse to surrender a table that had been reserved in her name. Mercer walked across the dining room. The piano continued playing, but the room had grown so quiet that the soft movement of his equipment could be heard between the notes. He stopped beside Evelyn without introducing himself. "You need to leave," he said. Evelyn looked up at him. "On what legal basis?" The question was calm, precise, and free of fear. Mercer seemed irritated by it. "The management has asked you to leave the property. The management accepted my reservation, seated me, and took my order. That is not relevant anymore. It is relevant if the request is based on false claims." Mercer placed one hand near the edge of the table and leaned closer. "I am not here to debate with you." Evelyn held his gaze. "Then you are not here to investigate." A low murmur moved through the room. Mercer straightened. He had expected excuses. He had expected nervousness. What he encountered instead was a woman who understood that authority without facts was only intimidation wearing a uniform. He asked for identification. Evelyn opened her handbag and removed her driver's license. Before handing it over, she asked, "Have you requested identification from the man who accused me?" Richard gave an offended laugh. Mercer ignored the question. He looked briefly at the license, reading the name without recognizing it, then returned it as though it proved nothing. "Stand up," he ordered. "I would like your name and badge number first." Mercer tapped the metal shield on his chest. "Everything you need is right here." Evelyn studied the number. Then she repeated it quietly, committing every digit to memory. Jamal stood several feet away, holding an empty tray. He watched Mercer refuse to examine the reservation confirmation lying beside Evelyn's plate. He watched Claire avoid looking at the hostess, who knew the booking was valid. He watched Richard smile. The injustice was no longer hidden beneath polite language. It was unfolding in plain sight, and the room was allowing it to happen. Evelyn slid the confirmation card across the table. "This can be resolved in less than 1 minute," she said. Mercer did not touch it. "You have 2 choices. You can walk out quietly, or I can make this more difficult." The pianist stopped playing. The final note faded into silence. Evelyn looked around at the faces turned toward her, then back at Mercer. "Officer, you have ignored the reservation, the witnesses, and the evidence placed directly in front of you. You have had 3 opportunities to learn the truth." Mercer's mouth tightened. "And you have had 3 opportunities to follow an order." Evelyn rose slowly, not because he had proven she was wrong, but because she understood that the truth sometimes needed room to expose the people determined to avoid it. As she reached for her handbag, Jamal placed his tray on a nearby table and quietly activated the camera on his telephone. The moment Evelyn stood, the room seemed to shrink around her. Every face turned in her direction, but almost no one met her eyes. Mercer stepped aside just enough to make it clear that he expected obedience, not explanation. Claire remained near the host station, pretending to straighten a stack of menus while Richard Vail watched with the satisfaction of a man who believed influence had once again delivered the result he wanted. Evelyn reached for her handbag, and as she lifted it from the chair, a small white handkerchief slipped free. Something inside it struck the polished floor with a soft metallic sound. A gold wedding ring rolled beneath the edge of the table and stopped beside Mercer's shoe. Evelyn froze. For the first time that evening, her composure shifted. Not because of Mercer, not because of the watching crowd, because that ring had belonged to Thomas. She bent slightly to retrieve it, but Mercer raised one hand. "Do not reach down," he said. The words were not shouted, yet they carried across the silent dining room. Evelyn slowly straightened. "That is my husband's wedding ring." Mercer looked at the small circle of gold near his shoe, then back at her. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Jamal's camera captured everything. The ring, Evelyn's expression, the distance between her and Mercer, the absence of any threat. Claire opened her mouth as if she might finally intervene, but Richard spoke first. "Officer, she has been difficult since she arrived." Evelyn turned toward him. "You wanted my table." Richard's smile disappeared. "This has nothing to do with the table." "It has everything to do with the table," she replied, "and with the belief that your preference matters more than my reservation." Mercer stepped between them. "Enough. We are leaving." Evelyn looked down at the ring again. "I will leave after I collect my property." Mercer hesitated, perhaps realizing how the scene would appear to anyone watching without prejudice. He moved his shoe back. Evelyn picked up the ring with careful fingers and wrapped it again in the handkerchief. The movement was gentle, almost ceremonial. For 29 years, that ring had represented a promise made in this very room. Now it had become evidence of how quickly dignity could be treated as inconvenience when the wrong person decided she did not belong. As Evelyn placed it inside her handbag, the screen of her telephone lit up. The caller identification read United States Marshals Service. Mercer saw the words. His eyes narrowed. "Why are federal marshals calling you?" "That is a private matter." "Are you involved in an investigation?" "You have not established any reason to ask me that." Mercer reached for the telephone, but Evelyn closed her handbag before he could see more. His suspicion deepened, not because he had discovered wrongdoing, but because her calm refusal challenged the control he thought the uniform guaranteed. Claire glanced toward the security camera above the entrance. Jamal noticed. He also noticed the hostess standing behind the reservation desk, pale and silent, her hand resting beside the screen that still displayed Evelyn Brooks, Table 12, confirmed. The truth was no longer hidden. It was simply being ignored. Mercer pointed toward the door. "Move." Evelyn took one step, then stopped beside the table where her untouched tea had begun to cool. She looked at Claire. "Please preserve the reservation record and all security footage from tonight." Claire's face tightened. "Why would we need to do that?" Evelyn answered without raising her voice. "Because by morning, everyone in this room may be asked what they saw, what they said, and what they chose not to do." For the first time, Richard looked uncertain. Mercer did not. He mistook her warning for arrogance. Jamal knew better. He kept recording as Evelyn walked toward the entrance, carrying the ring of the man she had loved and the silence of a room that had just revealed exactly what it was willing to tolerate. The front doors opened at 10:21 p.m. and a gust of cold rain swept across the marble floor. Evelyn stepped beneath the awning while Mercer followed close behind, certain the matter had ended the moment she crossed the threshold. Behind the glass, the diners remained still, their faces softened by golden light and distance, as though the door had separated them from responsibility. Jamal stood near the host station with his telephone held low against his apron, still recording. Claire watched him now. She knew. He knew she knew. Neither spoke. Outside, the rain tapped against the awning in a steady rhythm. Mercer pointed toward the sidewalk. "You can go." Evelyn turned to face him. "You brought me out here based on a complaint you never verified." "The manager asked you to leave." "The manager asked because a customer wanted my table." Mercer shook his head. "You people always have an explanation." The words hung between them. Simple, familiar, revealing. Evelyn's expression did not change, but her eyes sharpened. "You people?" Mercer looked away for half a second, then recovered. "People who refuse to follow instructions." "No," Evelyn said. "You said exactly what you meant." A black sedan slowed near the curb, then continued past. Mercer glanced at it, impatient. "This is over." Evelyn looked at the number on his badge again. She repeated it quietly. Mercer gave a short laugh. "Do you think memorizing my badge number is going to scare me?" "No." Her voice was almost gentle. I think your conduct should scare you. Mercer stepped closer, not touching her, but using his position and uniform to crowd the space between them. You are making this more complicated than it needs to be. I asked for my reservation to be honored. Claire changed the facts. Richard repeated them. You arrived and accepted their version without question. I made a judgment call. A judgment requires evidence. Mercer's jaw tightened. Do not lecture me about the law. Evelyn held his gaze for a long moment. Rain gathered along the edge of the awning and fell in silver drops behind her. Officer Mercer, would you have treated me this way if no one had been watching? He glanced toward the restaurant windows. The diners quickly looked away. No one cares who you are, he said. Evelyn turned her eyes toward the security camera mounted above the entrance. Its small red light blinked steadily. That, she replied, is exactly the problem. Mercer folded his arms. He heard defiance where there was only truth. Are you threatening me? I am giving you one final opportunity to correct the record. There is no record. Evelyn looked back toward the glass. Jamal was visible beyond the door, motionless, his telephone angled toward them. There is always a record, she said. At that moment, her telephone began ringing inside her handbag. She answered. Brooks speaking. A man's voice came through, controlled but urgent. Justice Brooks, this is Deputy Marshal Aaron Cole. Your protective detail has been trying to reach you. Are you safe? Mercer's expression shifted, but only slightly. Evelyn looked directly at him. I am outside the Belmont. I am safe, but there has been an incident. Silence followed on the line, brief and charged. Stay where you are, Cole said. We are 2 minutes away. Evelyn ended the call. Mercer stared at her. What did he call you? She placed the telephone back inside her handbag. You had 3 chances to ask the right questions inside. Headlights appeared at the far end of the block. 2 dark vehicles turned onto the avenue, moving toward the restaurant with quiet purpose. For the first time that evening, Mercer looked uncertain. Behind the glass, Richard Vail stopped smiling. The 2 dark vehicles stopped beneath the restaurant awning at 10:34 p.m. Their doors opened almost at once, and 4 members of the United States Marshal Service stepped into the ring. Deputy Marshal Aaron Cole moved ahead of the others, his coat unbuttoned, his expression focused. He looked first at Evelyn, then at Mercer, then through the glass doors toward the dining room. Justice Brooks, he said, stopping beside her. Are you all right? Mercer's face lost its color. The word justice had finally reached him, not as an idea, but as a title attached to the woman he had refused to hear. Evelyn nodded. I am not injured. I was removed from the restaurant after a dispute over a confirmed reservation. Cole turned toward Mercer. Officer, identify yourself. Mercer gave his name and badge number, but the confidence had drained from his voice. There was a complaint, he said. The manager reported that she was causing a disturbance. Did you verify that? Cole asked. Mercer glanced toward Claire. I spoke with management. That was not my question. Inside the restaurant, Claire stepped away from the host station. Richard Vail reached for his coat. Jamal remained where he was, his telephone still recording. Evelyn noticed Mercer looking at the camera above the entrance, then at the growing number of witnesses. He was beginning to understand that the evening had not ended when he ordered her outside. It had only become documented. Cole asked Evelyn whether she wished to leave immediately. She looked through the glass at table 12, at the untouched tea, at the empty chair across from it, and at the place where Thomas had once promised that no room would ever make her feel small. In a moment, she said. First, the evidence must be preserved. Cole nodded to another marshal, who entered the restaurant and requested the reservation record and security footage. Claire tried to explain that the situation had been misunderstood. Jamal stepped forward before she could finish. It was not misunderstood, he said. His voice trembled, but he did not lower it. I recorded what happened. The room turned toward him. Jamal held up his telephone. Ms. Brooks did not raise her voice. She did not threaten anyone. Mr. Vail wanted her table. Ms. Whitmore called the officer, and Officer Mercer refused to look at the reservation confirmation. Claire stared at him as though courage were a betrayal. Richard moved toward the exit, but Cole blocked his path with a calm question. Are you Richard Vail? Richard stopped. I have nothing to do with this. Evelyn looked at him through the open doorway. You began it when you decided your preference mattered more than my place at that table. The hostess finally stepped away from the reservation screen. Her booking was valid, she said softly. It was confirmed at 6:15 this evening. The truth arrived piece by piece. Not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly enough that every excuse began to collapse. Mercer reached for the notebook on his belt. I will complete a report. Evelyn looked at him. Be accurate. By 11:12 p.m. His report stated that she had been agitated, had refused repeated lawful instructions, and had made statements that caused concern for public safety. By 11:19 p.m., Jamal's video had already been sent to his sister, Maya Reed, a legal affairs reporter for a Washington news station. By 11:26 p.m., the restaurant security footage had been copied. By 11:41 p.m., Deputy Marshal Cole had reviewed enough of it to know the report did not match reality. Mercer believed the uniform would protect his version. He did not yet understand that every lie he added was becoming another witness against him. At 12:07 a.m., Police Chief Robert Ellis received the first call at his home. He had been asleep for less than an hour when Deputy Marshal Aaron Cole asked whether he had seen Officer Mercer's report. Ellis opened the department system, read the summary once, then read it again. The language was familiar. Agitated subject. Refused lawful instructions. Public safety concern. It was the kind of wording that could make doubt sound like fact. Then Cole sent the video. Ellis watched Mercer ignore the reservation card. He watched Evelyn remain calm. He heard the words, "You people." He saw Jamal recording from several feet away. When the video ended, Ellis sat in silence. At 12:24 a.m., he called Internal Affairs. At 12:31 a.m., Mercer was ordered to report to headquarters before the end of his shift. Mercer assumed it was routine. He told himself the department would understand that he had supported a business owner and prevented a disturbance. He told himself the woman's title had complicated the situation, but not changed the facts. Then the facts began arriving. At 1:06 a.m., the restaurant sent the security footage. At 1:21 a.m., the hostess provided a signed statement confirming Evelyn's reservation. At 1:38 a.m., Jamal submitted the full recording. At 1:52 a.m., Claire's telephone call was retrieved, including her claim that Evelyn had been shouting. The video showed Evelyn had never raised her voice. At 2:10 a.m., Ellis opened Mercer's personnel file. 3 prior complaints described nearly the same pattern. A black teacher removed from a hotel lobby after staff assumed she was trespassing. A black physician questioned outside his own medical office. A black college student detained near an apartment building where he lived. Each complaint had been closed without discipline. Each report had described the citizen as argumentative. Ellis felt something colder than anger. He felt recognition. The department had not failed to see the pattern. It had chosen not to name it. At 2:43 a.m., Mercer entered headquarters still wearing the confidence he had carried into the Belmont. That confidence weakened when he saw Chief Ellis, 2 internal affairs investigators, and the printed report waiting on the table. "Sit down," Ellis said. Mercer began explaining before anyone asked a question. He said Claire had sounded frightened. He said Richard was a respected businessman. He said Evelyn had challenged his authority. Ellis placed the reservation confirmation beside the report. Then the video. Then the prior complaints. "Which part of this supports what you wrote?" he asked. Mercer looked at the papers, but offered no answer. At 3:27 a.m., Evelyn joined the meeting by secure telephone. Ellis apologized and asked whether she wanted immediate termination. "No," she said. "I want the process followed correctly." Her voice was steady, but there was no softness in it. "Do not punish him because of my title. Examine what he did as though I were unknown, unconnected, and unable to call anyone powerful." The room became quiet. That request was harder than revenge. It demanded honesty. At 4:15 a.m., Internal Affairs recommended emergency suspension for false reporting, biased conduct, and failure to investigate. At 5:42 a.m., Mercer was escorted into the disciplinary room. Dawn pressed faintly against the window as Chief Ellis opened the black case. The clock moved toward 5:58. Mercer looked down at the badge that had protected his assumptions for years. This time, there was no manager to support him, no wealthy customer to confirm his story, and no silence strong enough to bury the truth. At 5:59 a.m., the black case closed, and Daniel Mercer's badge disappeared from view. Chief Robert Ellis did not celebrate. No one in the room did. The moment was not victory. It was consequence. Mercer signed the suspension order with a hand that no longer carried certainty, then left headquarters through a side entrance as morning traffic began moving across the city. By 7 o'clock, the department announced an independent review of his conduct and reopened the 3 complaints that had once been dismissed. This time, the people behind those files were contacted as citizens whose words mattered, not as problems to be managed. The black teacher was invited to give a full statement. The physician received a formal acknowledgement that the earlier inquiry had been incomplete. The college student, now finishing graduate school, agreed to speak only after Ellis promised the review would examine the system as closely as the officer. The Belmont faced its own reckoning. Richard Vale's membership was revoked after security footage showed how his demand had set the incident in motion. Claire Whitmore was removed from her position for making false claims and ignoring the reservation record. The restaurant's owners issued a public apology and offered to rename the private dining room in Evelyn's honor. She declined. "A room bearing my name will not repair what happened," she said. "Use the money to help people who are treated unfairly and do not have cameras, federal protection, or public recognition." The owners established a legal assistance fund and required independent civil rights training for every manager. Jamal Reed became the central witness in both investigations. When reporters praised his courage, he answered that he had only refused to pretend he had seen nothing. His recording did more than expose one evening. It reminded an entire city that silence can protect injustice as effectively as a lie. Weeks later, Evelyn returned to the Belmont. There were no cameras waiting outside and no officials beside her. She entered alone, carrying the same leather handbag. The new manager greeted her respectfully and led her to table 12. Evelyn placed Thomas's wedding ring beside her water glass and sat across from the empty chair. For a moment, the noise of the restaurant faded, and she remembered him smiling over a shared dessert, telling her that justice was not measured by how powerful people were treated. It was measured by what happened to those whom power believed it could ignore. Jamal approached with a cup of tea. "It is good to see you again, Justice Brooks," he said. Evelyn looked up. "Tonight, Evelyn is enough." He smiled and returned to his work. Across the room, every table was occupied, but no one questioned who belonged. Mercer eventually faced a formal hearing, and the evidence spoke without exaggeration. His false report, his refusal to investigate, and the reopened complaints ended his career in law enforcement. Evelyn never attended the hearing. She had not needed revenge, and she had never wanted fear. She wanted a record that could no longer be erased. As evening settled beyond the windows, she lifted the wedding ring and held it gently in her palm. The man who had worn a badge believed authority allowed him to decide whose dignity mattered. By morning, that authority was gone. Yet the deeper judgment was not that he had failed to recognize a Supreme Court justice. It was that he had believed an ordinary black woman should have needed such a title to be treated like a human being.